sing together. Open up the doors and let the music play, and let the streets resound with singing. Songs that bring your hope, songs that bring your joy, dancers who dance upon injustice. Let's sing together. Or did you feel the mountains tremble? Did you hear the oceans roar? When the people rose to sing of Jesus Christ, the risen one. Did you feel the people tremble? Did you hear the singers roar? When the lost began to sing of Jesus Christ, the saving one. And we can see that God, you're moving a mighty river through the nations. When young and old return to Jesus, fling wide you heavenly gates, prepare the way of the risen Lord. Open up the doors and let the music play, and let the streets resound with singing. And songs that bring your hope, and songs that bring your joy, and dancers who dance upon injustice. Let's join together in one song, all the saints. Do you feel the darkness tremble when all the saints join in one song, and all the streams flow as one river to wash away our brokenness? And here we see that God, you're moving, a time of jubilee is coming, when young and old return to Jesus. Fling wide you heavenly gates, prepare the way of the risen Lord. Open up the doors, open up the doors and let the music play, and let the streets resound with singing. With everything, come on. And songs that bring your hope, and songs that bring your joy, and dancers who dance upon injustice. We sing to you, Lord, beautiful Jesus. Open up the doors. Oh, open up the doors and let the music play. Let the streets resound with singing. Oh, songs that bring your hope, songs that bring
Who can melt the hardest heart and speak life into my soul? Who can spin the world around and hold me ever close? Who can search the depths of me and love me to the core? Who controls the world I see and walks me through it all? No one but you. No one but you. Who's made the righteous bright? Who's paved my way with grace? Love me through my darkest hours, 1,000 different ways. No one but you. No one but you. I'll sing of your love. I can't get enough. I just want you. The Lord of my soul, King of my heart, Jesus, it's you. I'll sing of your love. I can't get enough. I just want you. Whoa, the Lord of my soul, King of my heart, Jesus, it's you. Hear the oceans roar, see the skies light up every heart now. Sing to the Lord. Hear the rocks cry out, see the mountains bow, every heart come worship the Lord. Hear the oceans roar, see the skies light up every heart now. Sing to the Lord. Hear the rocks cry out, see the mountains bow, every heart come worship the Lord. Hear the oceans roar, see the skies light up every heart now.
Welcome to church, everyone. It's so good to have you joining in with us today. My name is Ethan, and it's so awesome to see so many of you here engaging with us online. It might not just be online very soon though, because on the 2nd of August, we have the opportunity for 200 of us to come and gather together here at our 9 a.m. and our 11 a.m. services in the morning. That's right, it's not our normal 10:45 service, we're changing it slightly to 11 a.m. just to make sure that we have enough time to clean the services of the auditorium as well as the building, and it also just enables us to make sure that all of our COVID safe practices are being held to. Our 6 p.m. service though is still going to be streaming online, and so you're able to jump back on here if you'd like to rewatch that at our 6 p.m. Time slot. We had an exciting engagement during the week of Dirk and Hannah. It's so amazing to see these guys get engaged, and if you'd like to congratulate them in the chat now, say congratulations. It's so exciting for those guys, and we're really excited for you. Now it brings us to a time of offering. Thanks to all those who have already given and continue to give to the ministry of this church. We're so blessed with a generous community. And if you would like to give to the church, there's a couple of ways you can do that, and they'll appear on the screen here. But thank you so much for all those that continue to give, especially over this time. Now, there's been some pretty funny things happen over the last 6 or so months as we've been doing online church. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that you might not have actually been able to see. We now have the opportunity to have a little bit of a watch at some of the things that go on behind the scenes that bring a little bit of a smile to my face. So join in with us here.
Alright, this is great blooper material.
Cut.
And welcome to Seeds Church Online. My name is Ethan Wildman, and this here is... Go again.
We got 9 minutes in.
And then I mucked it up.
I play better when I know.
Master English recording.
Awake my soul!
Hang on.
Right, you need to do it using the microphone.
What's the song called?
See the light. See the light! Awake.
Hey, g'day, this is Jonathan Davies, and you found us at the Seeds Church.
Just keep going.
I thought it was terrible!
That was great.
Now end up on Seeds memes.
Well, what a great service we've had today. We're so glad that you stuck around and that you...
Go. Just wait. Oh, that's good. That sausage is not sitting well.
Offering up some of our money that we've... Dang it!
Cut.
All these children, clean hands, clean hands, clean hands, clean hands, clean hands, clean hands, clean hands. Cut.
Hi everyone, on behalf of Bright Futures I'd like to thank you for your generous donations towards the COVID-19 crisis appeal, supporting the group in Canal Cross in India. We've raised around $5,000 and that's going to go a long way towards supporting that community. Thanks again.
Peace like a river wash over me. Immerse me in water as deep as the sea. Hide me in love, your healing embrace. Peace like a river wash over me. As I worship your majesty, I worship your holy name. Jesus, my everything, all that I am is yours. Oh, Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, rain down on me. Break open the heavens and drench the unseen. Pour out your presence as I pour out your praise. Come, Holy Spirit, Lord, have your way. As I worship your majesty, I worship your holy name. Jesus, my everything, all that I am is yours. As I worship your majesty, I worship your holy name. Jesus, my everything, all that I am is Open the heavens, flee wide the gates, flood every heart with mercy. Pour out your presence, inhabit our praise as we cry, holy, holy. Open the heavens, flee wide the gates, flood every heart with mercy. Pour out your presence, inhabit our praise as we cry, holy, holy. Open the heavens, flee wide the gates, flood every heart with mercy. Pour out your presence, inhabit our praise as we cry, holy, holy. As we cry, Lord, send revival, Lord, send it now. A move of your spirit, heaven break out. Come now in power, cover this land like you've done it before. Would you do it again? Lord, send revival, Lord, send it now. A move of your spirit, heaven break out. Come now in power, cover this land like you've done it before. Would you do it again? Lord, send revival, Lord, send it now. A move of your spirit, heaven break out. Come now in power, cover this land like you've done it before. Would you do it again? Lord, send revival, Lord, a move of your spirit, heaven break out. Come now in power, cover this land like you've done it before. Would you do it again?
Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 to 25. A call to persevere in faith. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is, his body, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart, with the full assurance that faith brings, with our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching.
Well, last week we started our Ripple Effect series where we looked at the stories of ordinary Christians who've had a great influence, and the ripple effect of their work has continued on even to this day. And we're telling these stories to encourage us all to consider our own ripple effect, to see the difference that we make in the world around us. I want to bring before you today a very nondescript German who became a very famous Englishman. His name is George Mueller, and I've sourced his information from his actual own biography and several websites devoted to his memory. You can easily, if you want to, find out more about him. His name's George Mueller. Next week we have a remarkable lady called Jackie Pullinger, who had quite a significant impact on a district in Hong Kong, but get ready for next week. Today's story begins 27th September 1805, when George Ferdinand Mueller emerged into the world. His father's occupation was as of a government tax collector, and he had great aspirations for his young son. But his early life was not marked by very good living. It was actually on the contrary. He was known as a thief and a liar and had somewhat of a liking for gambling. By the age of 10, get this, he was stealing money, particularly from his father, and money from the government, which was in his father's care. And notoriously, the story is that while his mother was dying, he was at 14 years of age, playing cards, drinking with his friends, unmoved by his mother's last days. And this lifestyle continued on for quite a few years, and there's a litany of troubles that he got into because of this. Muller's father hoped to provide him with a religious education that would allow him, must have been different in those days, to take a lucrative position as a clergyman in the state church. Apparently, in those days, in Germany, you did not need to be a Christian to be a minister. So he studied divinity at the University of Halle, and there he met a fellow student who invited him into a Christian prayer meeting, which he attended reluctantly. He was welcome when he went there and began to regularly attend and read his Bible, discussing Christianity with the others who were members of that meeting. This experience acted something like a trigger for him. It was like a light going on inside of him. And after seeing the transformation of a man who was praying on his knees, he was convicted and convinced of his own need to be right before God. That night, after seeing that and having that experience, as soon as he got home, he went to his bedside, knelt down and prayed. And he asked God to help forgive him for his past life, and to bless him wherever he went, and to make him clean from his sins. Immediately he stopped drinking, stopped stealing, stopped lying. His gambling addiction left him. And this experience turned completely around the life of young Mueller. A few years later, 1812, he decided to dedicate himself to missionary work, either in the East Indies or among the Jews in Poland. And so in June 1828, he offered himself as an appointment for this society. Now listen, get this for a short name for a society. The London Society for Promoting Christianity Amongst the Jews. And faithfully he arrived in London in March 1829 and studied, so he was studying Hebrew and Aramaic and to prepare for a missionary service. A few years later, he sort of ran foul of the rules of that society and couldn't accept them. So he left that occupation or that life that he was going to live and became a pastor of a small congregation. Sometime here, he became quite unwell, and while on recuperation, he met and made friends with a guy called Henry Craig, who became his lifelong friend and a fellow worker in the remarkable career that he was soon to have. In 1830, he married Mary Groves, and his biography is full of devotion towards her. In fact, it reads quite romantically. At the end of October, with Mary's full blessing, he renounced his regular salary as a pastor, believing that this practice could lead to church members giving out of duty, not desire. Interesting. He also eliminated the ongoing practice of the renting of church pews, arguing that it gave unfair prestige to the rich. And he continues his work in the church, and we find here one of the great things he was known for, his faith. He would spend time in prayer, asking God to fulfill all his financial needs. During the next few years, Mueller began a society called, get this one, the Scriptural Knowledge Institution for Home and Abroad, obviously attracted to short names for Christian organisations. But its goal was of aiding Christian schools and missionaries to distribute the Bible and Christian literature, providing for Sunday schools and day schools and adult schools, all so that they could all stand upon scriptural foundations. He busied himself with this work, and interestingly, offshoots of that work continue until this day. But Mueller's life took an amazing turn, feeling that his work was done in its present place, and at the invitation of his friend, his best friend Henry Craig, he moved to Bristol. Little did he know that his name was to become inseparable with that city. In fact, he'd go on to spend much of the remaining 66 years of his life there. Initially, he took up a pastorate in the city, and apart from some overseas travel, for the rest of his life, he preached faithfully at that church. And as God would have it, though he found a copy of a biography of a countryman by the name of August Franke, who had undertaken care of orphans in parts of Germany. Mueller had seen this man's work firsthand, and the book seemed to reawaken in him some long-forgotten urge, some desire that God had put inside of him. This book, combined with the work that Mueller was already doing in something like a modern-day breakfast club before school, shaped the future for the rest of his life. And it's with orphans that George Mueller is known so well for. In that era of Western society, orphans were abundant and often abused. Think back to the story of Oliver Twist and you get a bit of a sense of what was going on in that era. So it began in 1836 with the preparation of their own home for the accommodation, get this, of 30 girls. Could you imagine fitting 30 girls, orphans, in your home? The work was soon too big to be caught or captivated in one home, and soon after, 3 more houses were furnished, growing the total of children cared for just in a few years to 130. In 1845, as growth continued, Mueller decided that a separate building designed to house 300 children was necessary. And in 1849, that home opened. So large that a few years later, by 1870, 1,722 children were being accommodated in 5 different homes. The facts are as plain as they are remarkable, and Mueller was a man of fastidious scruples. He kept records for everything. He wrote down every detail about life, every detail you could imagine, and at the end of the year, he tallied it all up. We have very significant records of the work he did. One thing that you need to know through all of this is the most startling detail. George Mueller never made requests for financial support, nor did he go into debt, believing debt to be unscriptural. Even though their 5 homes cost, now remember this is in the 1800s, those 5 homes cost £100,000 to build. Many times he received unsolicited food donations only hours before they were needed to feed all the children. As you could imagine, Mueller was a man of prayer. Many hours he devoted to prayer and would often pray and read scripture on his knees. His biography reads as a man whose zeal for God, whose passion for God was unquenchable. Prayer to him was not an afterthought. It was as natural as breathing. And his Bible reading was so vigorous that he would read through the Bible 4 times a year. And it's said that in his lifetime, he read it over 200 times. I reckon it's actually probably more. While we might want to describe him as a holy man or a unique man, he was in fact a faithful man. Could even describe him as a simple man. He took God at his word and trusted God completely. He was a bit like, or reminds me like an athlete who devoted himself to training. His training ground was taking God at his word and acting on the promises of God. For us, of course, it looks very different, but we still serve the same God who is looking for opportunities to work through us. Mueller's story tells us that ordinary people become extraordinary in the hands of God. It's God who uses us to create the ripple effect. Mueller teaches us that if we find time to be quiet before God, to study his word, to pray, we will see a difference in our lives. And there's a striking similarity here between him and Catherine Hamlin from last week in their passion for God's word. Now, there are hundreds of stories about Mueller and his faith. I want to just give you 2 brief ones. As you know, Mueller prayed about everything and expected each prayer to be answered. One example was when one of the orphan house's boilers stopped working and they needed it to be fixed. Now, this was a problem because the boiler was bricked up and the weather was worsening by the day. It was needed to keep the children warm and provide the heating. So he prayed for 2 things. Firstly, that the workers he had hired would have a mind to work through the night. And secondly, that the weather would let up. Now remember, this is the Northern Hemisphere, and on the Tuesday before the work was to commence, a bitter north wind still blew in the morning. But before the workmen arrived, a southerly wind began to blow, and it was so mild that no fires were needed to heat the building. Remember, this is a building full of little children. That evening, the foreman of the contracted company attended the site to see how he might speed things along, urged on by Mueller, and instructing the men to report back first thing in the morning to make an early resumption to their work. The team leader said they'd preferred to work through the night, and so the job was done on time. On another well-documented occasion, they gave thanks for breakfast when all the children were sitting at the table, even though there was nothing to eat in the house. As they finished praying, the baker knocked on the door with sufficient fresh bread to feed everyone. And as it would be, the milkman gave them plenty of fresh milk because his cart had broken down in front of the orphanage. Over and over again, if you read his biography, there are stories like this. And throughout his many years of overseeing the orphanages, it was a rare occasion when they had more than 3 days' worth of money in hand. More often than not, they had just enough to meet their immediate needs. But never once did they go without. And they always had money to pay their bills on time, every time. It is a most remarkable story of faith. Every morning after breakfast, there was a time of Bible reading and prayer, and every child was given a Bible upon leaving the orphanage, together with a tin trunk containing 2 changes of clothing. The children were dressed well and educated well. And there was even a man employed as a school inspector to maintain the high standards amongst the children and in the schools that they were running. In fact, many claim that nearby factories and mines were unable to obtain enough workers because of his efforts in securing apprenticeships, professional training, and because his education was so good for all the children who were old enough to leave the orphanage. On the 26th of March, 1875, at the age of 70, and after the death of his beloved first wife and then his marriage to Susanna, he began a 17-year period of missionary travel. He travelled over 200,000 miles. Remember, this is pre-aviation times. He even travelled to Tasmania. Can you believe it? His language abilities allowed him to preach in English, French and German, and his sermons were translated into a whole pile of different languages. In 1892, upon returning to England, where having led a prayer meeting the night before, he died. Just a few years later, actually died in 1898, 10th of March, 1898. Having outlived his parents, his brother, 2 wives, close colleagues, and 2 children. You know, we might be tempted to say he had a really hard life and had a heavy burden to bear. That's not the way he saw it. He saw his life being marked with joy and the assurance of knowing that it was God he was in the centre of God's will. He put himself constantly in the place where he could hear God's voice, and he knew what to do. And I suppose the question comes to us, it certainly comes to me, are we willing to do the same? Put ourselves in the place where we can hear God's voice? Or are we scared of what God's going to say to us? His ministry was substantial. 10,024 children went through his orphanages. He educated and sent out into the world no fewer than 123,000 students. He circulated 275,000 Bibles in all sorts of different languages and nearly as much in small portions of the Bible. He aided missions to the extent, now remember this is some time ago, £255,000. He supported 189 missionaries and employed 112 assistants or aides as people for his work. All this with no appeals for funds, no fundraising campaigns, no advertising, but simply through prayer. I worked it out what it would be in today's money. And it works out roughly around about 180 million Australian dollars in today's money. It said that when he died, the whole of Bristol stopped. And it was something like the parades at Princess Diana's procession which took place. Over 2,000 orphans assembled to say goodbye to their father. And his work continues today. In fact, I know someone who worked for the George Mueller Charitable Trust. So there you go. There's a story of an eccentric German with Puritan ideals who moves to England and makes a difference through prayer and faith. I actually have a DVD copy of his life. It's average viewing, but you might like to look at it. It's called Robber of the Cruel Streets, and I'll be happy to lend it to anybody who'd like to view it, or maybe a Bible study group might like to view it. But I suppose what challenges me most to the core is his prayer and his faith. The prayer that he would meet with God, commune with God, live with God, and the faith that God would actually meet him at his point of need. I don't pretend at once that this is for all of us. This story is of a man set apart, yet there are things here that should affect us and encourage us. It's not a story of wonder, it's a story of a man who was devoted to God, who sought God's face with prayer and discipline and reading Scripture. It's not an isolated story, but it's one that's repeated over and over again. For the things that connected Mueller to God connect you to God. We all have the opportunity for prayer, and I'm quick to admit that I have to make personally time for prayer. I don't find it easy to do, but when I do, I know it's a great blessing. And I find I have to make it a habit. I have to do it first thing in the morning to ensure that I communicate with God, but not just one way, that I allow space to hear back. And we all too have that same opportunity to exercise faith. Faith simply means trusting God and acting on what you already know about God. All those who trust in Jesus have already exercised a measure of faith. And by using it, you actually make it grow more. So George Mueller's influence was huge. Yours doesn't have to be as big as that. In fact, it might just be for one person. And that's enough. So let's be brave enough to do that. Let's allow our ripple effect to affect others. Let me lead you in prayer. Lord, we thank you for people who've gone before us like George Mueller. We thank you for his work and his faith. We thank you for the inspiration that comes with hearing his story. But we pray we won't be daunted by that, but that we'd be encouraged to live our story, and that our ripple effect would be felt by many others, even those particularly around us. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, breathe, call these bones to live, call these lungs to sing once again.